Hey guys, how's it going? I recently bought the Castlevania Advance Collection after waiting for quite a long time for it to go to a better sale price. I've played most of those games in the past, but never really completed them. When I worked at Blockbuster years ago, I got a lot of good deals on Game Boy Advance games, and I think I bought Circle of the Moon before that because that was much earlier on, a couple years before. But then I ended up buying Harmony of Dissonance at when I worked there on discount. It was used, and I think it was a European copy if I remember correctly. So I played both those, but never finished them. I remember getting annoyed with Circle of the Moon, I guess both for the difficulty and the weird DSS system, which honestly it's been so long I don't really remember much about it other than that it used cards. But yeah, so I had forgotten that Dracula X was part of the collection, and I've played it before. I've owned Rondo on the Wii Virtual Console. I've never had a TurboGrafx, so I didn't get to play the original one. Much to my disappointment when I was younger because I wanted to play Splatterhouse so bad. It wasn't until years later that I actually really got to play it. I can't remember if I played it on an emulator or if I never. I think I actually didn't get to play it until Virtual Console. Now that I think about it, but yeah, huge fan of Splatterhouse series too. So I'll probably do some artwork on that again. Not like I haven't done a million of those. But yeah, so getting into Dracula X, I had played it before. I had ROMs of it back in the day. I had both the Super Nintendo US version and I also had the European Vampire's Kiss, which, as far as I could tell, was not much difference other than literally just the title screen. I thought the Vampire's Kiss logo looked kind of cool. I do like a lot of the colors in this game, which I think was probably, part of me wanting to do a painting again. I have done a few Castlevania things in the past, but none of them were really great. I mean, I don't think this necessarily turned out like the best thing ever either, but it's all right. I tend to like these kind of montage style paintings that are more like something you would see in a movie poster, or I guess like in an old game cover art. They did tend to kind of cram a lot of stuff into those old Castlevania cover arts, especially Super Castlevania 4. There's so many things going on. It's almost like it's the entire game crammed into one picture, which, I mean, that is typically what they go for in those kind of narrative movie posters. Some of the classes that I've taken talked a lot about that, trying to storytell through the image, and that's something I still, don't am not like great at, because it is a really high level skill. Of course, being able to cram a bunch of stuff into a small area in a painting is not an easy thing to do. Kind of like the perspective versus composition challenge. I can't remember if I've talked about that in any other videos, but that is definitely a very difficult thing. The more stuff you cram in there, the more details there are going to be. To make my goofy comparison that I always make, it's like a fighting game, like a versus fighting game, like Street Fighter, where the more characters that you have, the more complicated things get, and the more likelihood that one person's move is going to be broken versus another's. And then if you change that move to compensate for that character that it's broken against, then maybe you make it weak against others, or it's a push and pull kind of thing. So the more elements you try to put into it, and that's why they always like drill into us the simple statement thing, which I'm really bad about not following. I tend to want to draft first since I have, some pretty decent perspective skills, which I didn't use much at all in this image, but that's all right. Just going for colors, basically. And it gets kind of hard to like zero in on like what's going on in the painting itself at the moment because it's sped up so fast. This is at 10 times. That's the only way I could really make this video not be ridiculously long. I know people probably don't have much of an attention span for this kind of thing, and this was actually a really short painting too. I also, while I'm thinking about it, the reason why it starts where it does is because my first recording got lost. For whatever reason, I had an encoding error, and the MP4 recording got dropped. So going forward now, after having researched it, I understand now that the MKV files are not really vulnerable to this problem, and so it is a good bit more work, but so now I've decided I'm going to record in MKV files and then remux them into MP4s. I've done a good bit of video encoding and stuff back in the day. I used to record TV shows off the cable box and burn them to disk just for my own personal collections. Actually completely legal to do too, by the way, as long as you're not selling them. So once you turn them back into MP4s again, then I can go through the awfulness of Clipchamp just to speed it up. It looks like Reaper can actually speed it up, but the rendering time is absolutely ridiculous. Like it's only doing like 1.5 times or something, which, this short video, this is like 5.5 hours of video, so you're talking about, 2.5 hours at best for it to render the video, versus I could do it in, let's see, between Clipchamp and Reaper, doing the two different components separately. I think it's probably about like 25 minutes or something like that. Anyway, so still trying to move forward with using some sound engineering ideas to improve the audio quality. That's always going to be kind of like a work in progress sort of thing. I haven't really done much recording vocals. Actually, no, I haven't recorded any vocals for music. I usually just play instrumental stuff. And I'll spare you guys the horror of putting my music on like the background of these videos. That's why I don't put any music on here. A, because I don't want to put cheesy copyright-free stuff on here. I'd love to be able to put some stuff from the games, but I'm pretty sure we get copyright infringement or something. I mean, I don't know if that even matters if you're not monetized, which I obviously am not, but or nor should I get even close. I mean, even huge name artists don't really get that many views relative to like what's considered a lot of views. It really should be kind of genre dependent on how they choose to support people like that. I mean, a channel that's like, some like these guys that just spend millions of dollars to be like, oh, I bought some random person $100,000 house just to make a video. Like that kind of stuff, you can't compete with shit like that. Like it's just crazy. So anyway, getting back into this, looks like we're working on a lot of occlusion shadows in the current point in the video. Kind of going through that for a while there. As I've said before, I don't tend to work in passes except at the beginning. Like you can kind of tend to do that like when you first start, but then as I go on, I tend to work on areas. So that's why I will flip back and forth between layers and stuff. It probably is kind of weird to watch on video, and like, why am I doing this the way I'm doing it? It does require a lot of like non-drawing or painting kind of activities, like switching layers and things like that a lot, which is kind of annoying to me. They do say it can get you out of your flow state if you do it too much or stick with it too long. I've kind of got it down to where a lot of it is really sort of autonomous at this point, and I can just kind of do it, without really thinking too much about it. Looks like starting to work on some of the highlights here. That's something I think I need a lot of work on in general. It's a hard thing to understand. I've studied a lot of the science behind it and like, what colors it should be when it happens and things like that. But as far as placement, that's another matter. Like putting highlights on shapes is a tricky thing. Changes dependent on your view position. The Lambertian reflection, or, what we tend to think of as just like the normal surface reflectance, the non-shiny stuff, that kind of thing, like, you move and a shadow is not going to move. Like the viewer, I'm sorry. Then when the viewer moves, the shadow is not going to move. Your view of it and the perspective and stuff like that will change, but the shadows will still be in the same placement, the same lightness levels will still occur in the same places. Versus with specularity, those highlights, they change depending on where the viewer is. And of course, if we move the light source, they're going to change too, but that pretty much changes everything. It is a really strange thing to kind of try to understand, and to try to like place them out of logic doesn't necessarily work. You might get it like kind of halfway right. The Marco Bucci lesson where he talks about the different types of highlights is very helpful, and honestly, I need to go back and watch it again myself. But I think I need to do a lot of experimentation with real objects in real life and move things around, see how the highlight changes. That's definitely an important thing. So going into this and kind of trying to like make it so this dark background back here isn't just such a flat, almost completely black shape. Maybe had a little too much contrast, so adding a little bit of details and maybe like a little pathway up to the castle. Still don't really like that much how the castle looks in the finished version, but it definitely looks better than where it is here. I did do a fairly detailed color composition for this before I started on it, trying to get down the shapes and everything, because I'm just sick of painting stuff that turns out to be a big mess. One of the last paintings I did, I went perspective first, and it just ended up being a mess. No matter what I did with it, even tried to like flatten out the background value so that everything would read better, and it just didn't work. So here, applying some focal blur. That's why everything disappeared for a second there. Just trying to grab the hillside and the castle and everything, and just you make a copy of it, and then you basically just blur the copy with a filter, and then you put a layer mask on it, and you can use the layer mask to kind of like blend in different amounts of the blur in different places. I think it feels a little too heavy-handed sometimes. I need to figure out a better way to do it. I tend to do focal blurs by hand on the characters themselves. I feel like that they're more important, so it uh, warrants that kind of level of detail. And then here, putting some highlights into the hair, trying to get a little bit of transparency. I was actually pretty happy with how that turned out. I always have a lot of trouble with hair. I need to look into studying that more. We have talked about it in some of the classes that I've been in, but I haven't done the study on my own individually. I think a lot of stuff in school is like that, where you learn the beginnings of it, but to get in depth with it can take a lot of time. Just like especially composition, there was still a lot of study to be done on your own, because composition in and of itself requires studying a lot of different images. So you really they can show you what is good composition, what is bad composition, and give you ideas for original compositions, but in the end you still have to go through and study a bunch of them on your own and see like different examples of just different things they've done. It helps you remember it too, because some of the things that I've learned I kind of tend to forget about, like things like drawing attention through texture. I mean, I do that a good bit when there's like a natural background. So the idea behind that is that either like the thing you want to draw attention to has a lot of texture and everything else doesn't, or the way I tend to like to use it is to give a lot of texture to everything else and not give textures to the things that are important. Because sometimes characters can look pretty weird with too much texture, especially in the kind of way that I paint, which is going sort of for like a more traditional, like something you would see in a traditional American animated movie or something like that, like an old Disney movie, something like that, but a little more modernized. Colors and edges are generally my priority for things. I mean, I think composition as well, but that should go without saying. Composition is always important. Doesn't mean I always use it properly when you're just doing sketches and things like that. So here, kind of giving Dracula like a sort of a mist or vapor effect, kind of calling back to the Symphony of the Night, like Alucard turning into mist and things like. Well, I mean, I guess misty vampires have been a thing for a long time. And even though I own Symphony, I actually still have never played it. So a little bit more back to the game. I was not expecting it to be so difficult. I mean, Castlevania games generally are pretty hard. Like, if you go into a Castlevania game expecting it to be easy and you've played one before, and that's on you. But yeah, this thing is, I mean, some of the enemies are just ridiculous. The spear guys, holy crap, they're crazy. Um, their priorities are insane. They can outreach your whip. They can stab you from above and below. I did figure out a couple places where you can actually use them to sequence break, where the traditional what we've had since the 16-bit. Or actually, I guess all Castlevanias really. Anyway, where you're scrolling through the level, you go up to a second level, scroll back toward the direction you came from, and then of course, if you fall at the very end, you're all the way back at the beginning of the screen again. So I found some sequence breaks where you can jump, get hit by a spear guy, and he will actually boost you up onto the higher level. And in some of these places, it's right where the exit to the next screen is. So you basically just run up, get hit, and run on to the next screen. And I have to fight like 4 or 5 of these guys. And the fact that they take I think it's like 5 hits to kill them, it's pretty crazy. I don't think it's just me. I went and looked it up. Anytime something pisses me off in a game, I got to go look it up. Like, hey, I mean, is this just me? Um, Also, in case you're wondering about the smoke effect there, I'm using the smudge tool to get it to kind of get a little more vapor-like on the ends, or like a, smoke that's being blown by something, versus having that kind of cloudy look like the rest of it. Working on some more Dracula here with uh, like a stipple style brush and kind of imitate like a really ragged traditional brush. Maybe something like a flat cut sable or something, or maybe just one with not too many hairs in it. And then kind of, yeah, trying to work up this hand for Richter. Still kind of feel like it probably should have had a little brighter highlights. It is the thing that is coming most closely toward the camera on him at least, or actually I don't know, either that or his knee. The knee's not going to really have too much highlight though, so I'm not too concerned with that. I think in a second here start to work on the little crystal at the end of his whip. I don't feel like I really got that great, but it probably could have been better. I was afraid to make it too bright and cause like a highlight that was going to draw too much attention, because there's, the darkest value in the image almost is right behind that thing. So if I made it shine too brightly, I felt like it was gonna, yeah, just draw too much attention there. I mean, we do want some attention to the whip, because I'm sure you can see that's part of my compositional flow there. It's a little broken up in certain places just to give some variety. But essentially, you're coming down from the top left from the castle, kind of coming down the path. You wanted to, like, even though the path in the scene would be going up to the castle, I wanted to draw the eye the opposite way. Like, we want you to start at the castle and draw downward toward where Richter is, and then we go from Richter, and both hopefully this headband and the chain are leading you to Dracula, and then his little vapor shape is leading you to him finally, his glowing eye. And then hopefully that pulls you back into a loop with the castle. It's got those really bright orange lights and stuff, and so you're just getting like pulled in a circle, hopefully, if things are working right. And then, of course, obviously, the shape of the background is meant to work with that shape too. So yeah, still going in here and just working on the whip, because I just kind of laid it in there very quickly and crappily, as you can see up close. It doesn't look terrible from a distance, but I mean, in the zoomed out window, but when you get up close to it, it looks pretty bad. And it didn't really take much time to fix. I just used the smudge tool. I've kind of gotten to where have started to like the smudge tool for fixing flats. It's not much different than using like a hard round brush that has absolutely no pressure on it whatsoever. So then basically, when you put and no size. Every once in a while I'll turn on the size when I'm doing that, but for flats where you just want the edges to be 100% opaque, but the trick to that is that, it's absolutely unforgiving. You make even one pixel mistake and it pops up there. But that's why I like the smudge brush, because I don't have to constantly switch back and forth between an eraser and that 100% value. And then you need your eraser to be like that as well, and I don't generally keep mine that way, so that makes me have to switch the settings on my eraser too. Whereas the smudge brush can do the functions of both, and you not have to, change anything. And I tend to use it to, yeah, like just kind of like smooth out places where the original flats had a problem, like maybe there's a little bit sticking out where it shouldn't, or vice versa, where there's like two shapes that kind of meet each other and there's too much of a cut in between them and it looks too sharp. Which you'll, as I go on, I'm sure you will notice places where I've done that, especially in the headband. Actually, I know we're past it now, but the point where I was doing the headband, I did that a lot, because that thing was just kind of a very quick fill in. Initially, I didn't really want to leave that split in between it, because I was afraid it would make too much of a like contrast point, but it's actually, I didn't think it was too bad once I saw how it actually looked. As you can see in the zoom out window, we're like zoomed out to the entire image, which I believe is 12% right there. It's actually hard to tell when I'm in Reaper where the actual screen ends and begins because there's a black bar at the bottom of my recording, but Reaper also has black bars on the video when you're watching it in here, so really kind of tricky to tell. I guess as I do this more, I'll figure out more about it because this is really only, I think, the third video I've made with Reaper. So there's still a lot of things to learn. Looks like kind of working on global illumination a little bit here. I don't want to make it too strong in this one because this is, obviously super late dark nighttime and you want it to be pretty dark. In most nighttime scenes, there actually is almost no GI at all unless there's like some kind of super, super strong local light source and it's hitting things just the right way. But most of the time, if you watch like movies and stuff, and of course it's exposure based too, right? So if the movie is exposed a certain way, it's gonna just completely crush all that global illumination out of the scene. You watch a lot of horror movies and stuff, and you look at the shadows, and they are absolutely black clipped completely. Like the darkest value in this image, it looks like it's pretty dark, but and I think if I remember correctly, it's a lightness of 3, which is this pretty dark. You can't really get much darker than that, but it still looks significantly brighter than a pure black with like no value to it whatsoever and no color to it. Sometimes when you have a really, really dark color and you've got a super saturated color, it actually looks more realistic. You notice that cameras tend to crush things that way, where they don't clip completely to black, they just clip to like a super, super saturated dark blue or kind of purple color. I've still never been 100% sure exactly why that happens and it doesn't just crush to completely black, but who knows. I think, getting toward the end of this here, because it looks like there's about 4 or 5 minutes left on the video. Working a little bit more on, just refining edges and things like that, trying to make sure the highlights feel like they make sense. Probably working on, I know there was some work on focal points. I did a little bit of stuff after the video, not really much. I didn't really want to, because this thing was already like 4 or 5 videos that I had to clip together. I was trying not to make, another one for like 15 or 20 minutes. It's just some little adjustments to things, some color quality and things like that. Worked on, I think, trying to get the castle to look better. Of course, I'm sure the thumbnail is always going to be the final, so, whatever you see at the end of the video, don't assume that's the actual final image, because I did work on it some after that. A good bit of work went into the beginning of this as well, and I don't mean the part where the video got lost, but before I recorded anything, and that's just the, plotting the colors and composition and doing the line art drawing and just, preparing the real final image and transporting like the colors and layers and everything over to it. I did something a little bit different than I usually do with this one, where I just blew up the color composition onto the final version and then sketched the line art on top of the color comp that I had made. It was a method that I had thought about using a long time ago, but just never really got to doing. And I like this method because it's kind of in between. You know how some artists will start with like a silhouette or shape and just paint things in and they just never use any line art. I've always liked that idea, but I've never been able to do it. It makes me paint like really, really terrible faces. And I know my anatomy is not the greatest. Like that arm there isn't, it could be better. Bicep is definitely not right, but that's all right. It has, some stylization to it, but it definitely could be better. It's weird how sometimes you don't notice things until much later. It's like when you look at it for too long, maybe it's your subconscious, who knows. Yeah, I wish I could have put some of the music on here. I do like a lot of the Castlevania music. I've done some covers of some of that stuff. When I first got into recording my own music, I went through a lot of, I don't know, a lot of work, I'd say, to learn how to play Vampire Killer, and got a nice recorded version of that. I mean, I've learned so much since then. It generally doesn't sound that great to me now compared to the stuff I know how to do now. But unfortunately, I recorded it in Ableton, and transporting all the stuff from that to Reaper would be, I don't know if it would be worth it. I honestly think I would rather just redo the entire thing from scratch than to do that. Yes, it would be more work, but it would also sound a lot better. I've gotten some better equipment and stuff since then too, so there's multiple advantages to that. However, I probably won't ever end up doing that because that song is very hard to play, and I've forgotten how to play it exactly. I had to completely relearn the song and including the bass parts and everything. So, better probably just to move on to something different. I had started trying to learn Tragic Prince from Symphony of the Night. It's a really good song. It's a very guitar centric song, so it would be perfect for me. But it's just weird. It sounds detuned. I think he is like very subtly laying on the whammy. I don't really know for certain. It's very hard to find any kind of footage or anything of him playing it. It was a musician named Tak Fuji. I guess Fuji E because it has two eyes at the end. So yeah, Tak Fuji E. I can't remember. I don't remember if his first name was Takahashi or Takamoto. I had to look it up again because like when I first searched it, it's like all the results came back with just Tak Fuji. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess he just goes by that most of the time. Hard to even find pictures of him or anything. I think he works at like a small game studio now, from what I saw. But yeah, anyway. Point being, I don't really understand. The song sounds like really detuned. But that was my assumption, that he was just kind of subtly laying on the whammy. Sometimes when people do that, it's kind of hard to tell. Or if they're like using pizzicato in their legato or their tapping technique, it can be kind of hard to tell if that's happening or if they're using the whammy, because you hear this like very slightly going out of tune. Eddie Van Halen used to do it a lot, where he'd tap and then stretch the string and then release. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I don't know. Everybody here is not probably not into all that kind of musical stuff, so yeah, probably better to stick with this. So for the skin, I've gone and changed the shadow colors to make them a little more skin-like. Generally, I try to make everything that has no transparent properties have like the same shadow color, but for things with subsurface scattering like skin, they're gonna kind of have a different color, and I feel like that did make a big difference. I like the color of the skin a lot more now. Like it has more of a the shadows versus the highlights have more of a contrast with each other that looks more interesting. It might be a good thing to do with clothing too, but that's something that I kind of have to experiment with. I definitely like the way that blue looks as well. And that was kind of just like studying images of Richter and seeing, generally what color his outfit was. I found some good, artwork and renders. And here, going into trying to fix the background a little bit, make it more interesting. I used reference of Dracula's castle from the show. I think even in some of the games, it looks kind of similar to that. So yeah, some a little bit of perspective on the little towers here, but of course the background is just mostly a silhouette. I think I did work on a little bit of one of those shapes with an actual perspective. Yeah, like those two parts of the left tower right there. They look like they're super weird shapes, but it's actually that they're at a 2-point perspective. They were like that in the original references that I saw, so I just went ahead and kept that. And then here, as I'm reworking on this background, I'm going to have to, of course, blur it like I did before. That's one thing I really dislike about that technique, is that, if it turns out that you don't like what you did, you have to go in there and work on it again and then redo the entire blur again, which I am guessing is about to happen since I'm, turning off all the layers. Alright, well, looks like I'm about to run out of time on this one here. You can check out the final image on DeviantArt as usual. Sorry, but I don't really like all the other platforms AI scraping my stuff, so I guess I'll be sticking with DA for the time being. Anyway, you guys have a nice day.